For last 60, 70 years, the things were unfortunately very much against Tibetans. I see that this kind of, let it be purely because of Americans' compulsions. You know, so what? If it is a compulsion of Americans to go anti-China, it is an opportunity for Tibetans to join hands. This is how you can fight. You can join hands, and it's only finding common interest that we can find a common enemy. So right now the atmosphere is changing, and this TPSA Act 2020, in my opinion, is a tip of the iceberg. It is an indication of the changing times in favor of Tibet. I think this is the first volley fired in favor of Tibet. And you will see many things coming up. European Union is also waking up once again. So these alliances like Quad are suddenly coming up against China, which we could never imagine 10 years before. So the world is changing. This time we are going to talk about the new US law, which is about Tibet, the Tibet Policy and Support Act 2020. You know, when this act was passed in 28th of December, that was the day when President Trump signed it and made it a law. I see that this law is something very outstanding in so many ways. That's why we are talking about it. My association with Tibet as a journalist, as an observer, is going to be almost 50 years now. But I find that this law of United States of America is historic in so many ways. I think it's one of the highest points of Tibet receiving real support from the world community. In my opinion, this is a marking of that. This is one of those announcements. This law itself is an international announcement, which is a direct challenge to the People's Republic of China on issues especially related to colonialism and specifically Tibet. This law once again shows to people who had been used to seeing China as a bully, running roughshod over everybody for last 30, almost 20, 30 years. This law shows that PRC, the People's Republic of China, is not invincible. It's not a force which can't be handled. And it also underlines the supremacy of Dalai Lama as far as the issue of Tibet is concerned. This law has opened new gates for the whole world to take action on not only on Tibet but on the Chinese colonialism being practiced in so many countries, especially like Tibet, East Turkestan, which we call Xinjiang, South Mongolia, Manchuria, etc., and its rogue behavior with the Taiwan, Hong Kong, etc. So this law also underlines those points where China needs to be challenged internationally. It also shows way forward for India and many other countries, and also for the Tibetan leaders in exile, a way forward. And I think I'll not be completing my comment fully and not doing justice if I don't say that this law has shown the maturity of American democracy. Because this time we saw a wonderful face of US democracy. So coming to this, I will tell you, I will speak about the various aspects through a PowerPoint presentation, which makes it a little easier for you. So we start with The first slide, the new US law on Tibet and its significance. So this is about Tibet Policy and Support Act 2020. Uh, there are some major points in this presentation, in this law. Uh, Already there have been many laws passed by the US government in the past, plus many rules and orders issued by the US government on different occasions about Tibet and China in context of Tibet. So this time there are only very few things new, but what this law does is that coming out of the mesh of so many previous laws and orders and rules, this law aims at consolidating all those things without negating any of those rules passed earlier. At some points, this law has made some amendments. Otherwise, most of the previous laws and rules have been consolidating at one place. There are a few new additions. On some points, there have been special assertions. And one thing very interesting about this law is that on implementation, this time it doesn't leave any ambiguity. If you remember, many years ago, a very common phrase which used to come from White House whenever China would challenge America or White House or the president on some statement on Tibet, they would say, no policy of United States government is based on the assumption that Tibet is not a part of China. So all full of negatives, a lot of ambiguity. This time, there is hardly an ambiguity. So this time, all those laws have been amalgamated, especially some old laws. So there were so many laws and so many rules which were existing on Tibet. At that in this 2020, while doing amalgamation and consolidation, we'll keep in mind which were the major laws. The one major law was the TPSA 2002, the Tibet Policy and Support Act in 2002. At that time, also, there was an attempt to consolidate all the previous laws and rules. There is one very important one, Public Law 102 to 138 of 1991, which was quite significant. The financial assistance rules have been passed so many times about Tibet. So all these are going to be part of the new law. So in 2002, it was mentioned very clearly while this bill was introduced and passed into a law. It very clearly said that it's a comprehensive and pragmatic expression of congressional support for the Tibetan people. So that shows the support for Tibet has been already there, only now the degree and shape is changing. The standard purpose, the stated purpose of this law in 2002 when it was introduced was made it very clear. It is there to support the aspirations of the Tibetan people to safeguard their distinct identity. And that law was designed to fit within a sensible, what they call sensible framework of US China policy, which left a lot of space of ambiguity. And but still, it was quite a brave attempt. In 1991, there was public law, this 102 to 138, and especially the section 335 was a very revolutionary statement. It said that Tibet, including those areas incorporated into the Chinese provinces of Sichuan, Yunnan, Gansu, and Qinghai, is an occupied country. It says Tibet is an occupied country under the established principles of international law. A very unique thing of this particular assertion was that while America was defining Tibet, it did not follow the Chinese dictations. China, when they occupied Tibet in 1951, after that, in 1962, and later they reorganized Tibet. And the game they played, a very colonial game, was that Tibet had three provinces, Utsang, Amdo, and Kham. And they were almost of equal size. What China did, they snatched away two provinces, Kham and Amdo, the two eastern provinces. Dalai Lama was born in Amdo. So those two provinces were broken into pieces, and those regions were amalgamated into adjoining Chinese provinces, which are Yunnan, Sichuan, Qinghai, and Gansu. So the result was the remaining Tibet, which was left, was almost one third. China renamed it as TAR, Tibet Autonomous Region. And since then, China is claiming that this is Tibet. So American government made it very clear in section 335 of the Public Law 102 to 138 in 1991 that Tibet means all provinces, all parts of Tibet which have been incorporated by China into adjoining provinces of Sichuan, Yunnan, Gansu, and Qinghai. Now we come to the new law, TPSA 2020. The very first thing which strikes China into its eyes is its open support for Dalai Lama. The US government, the law very clearly says that the US government, its agencies and officials all stand on the side of Dalai Lama. And Dalai Lama means Gaden Podrang. That's a Tibetan term which is used for the personal office of Dalai Lama. If I can go a little closer to make it easy, like White House means President of America. So Gaden Podrang means Dalai Lama's office. So it says that the US government, its agencies and officials, they stand on the side of Dalai Lama and his office. So that's a very revolutionary statement, which very clearly shows that Dalai Lama is the supreme authority of Tibet in the opinion of policymakers, lawmakers of America. An issue which is very hot currently, not only outside Tibet, but it's hot and rather China is schizophrenic, I would say, if we can use that term. Chinese leaders are practically under a kind of fever about reincarnation of Dalai Lama. Chinese leaders have been insisting for years that Dalai Lama, when he will be reborn, it will be the exclusive right of the Communist Party of China to find out the next incarnate baby, identify the baby, certify the baby, and install the baby as the next Dalai Lama. It's very interesting. It's a Communist Party which has been always claiming that religion is opium for the masses. And here is the same party which is announcing that it has exclusive right to find out the reincarnation of next Dalai Lama. And rather, in 2007, Chinese government came out with a law. This law was called Order 5. And it has become a part of the constitution of China, which says that the right to identify, to search out, to find out and certify and install any incarnate Lama, including Dalai Lama, is the exclusive domain of Communist Party of China. One can only laugh at it. If they were really serious about it, I would very politely tell our friend Xi Jinping, please first go and find out the reincarnations of Mao. Find out the reincarnation of Deng Xiaoping and install them as the supreme leaders of China. If you are so genuine about your claims. So anyhow, so on this issue, this law very clearly says that People's Republic of China or Communist Party of China have no rights to interfere in the selection process of Dalai Lama or any other Tibetan incarnate Lama. In Tibet, they are called incarnate lamas are called Tulku. Chinese, they call them living Buddha. So this TPSA 2020 makes it very clear on this issue. It's not only that the American government, the new law passed by the U.S. Congress and then signed by the American president. It's not only that it says that the final right about reincarnation is Dalai Lama's himself or Tibetans themselves. It also makes it compulsory for the coming governments of United States of America to act in such a situation. It very clearly it directs the Secretary of State and all those US agencies which deal with China in the field of business, technology, import, export, or other interactions to embargo every such Chinese leader or official or any Chinese company who are involved in the process of uh, reincarnation, finding the reincarnation or certifying the reincarnation, and it puts a ban on all these leaders and their families from entering United States of America. This is very interesting. If you look at it, it may look, somebody may laugh at American government. Oh, in case you don't allow the Chinese or their families to come to America, specific persons, so what? No, it's not so what, it's a lot what. Because right now there are thousands and perhaps millions of Chinese students who are living in America, who belong to rich families, who belong to the political leaders, the real, the princelings who are today living in America or are have ambitions to go to America and study. If you stop it, then America in China, it's going to create a lot of social problem among the elite, among the rich people, among the political leadership, among the military leaders, because their wards, their children would not be allowed to go to America. And it's not something small. About dialogue between Dharamsala and Beijing, or between Tibet and China. This law earlier, it used to say that American government used to appeal, used to suggest Chinese leaders to talk to the Dalai Lama or his representatives. But with aging Dalai Lama, uh, it's being realized that China can play a trick on this in this field. So what this law has done, it removes all preconditions. Uh, it says that it will not be only the Dalai Lama or representatives, it's the elected leaders of Tibetan people. That means the CTA leaders, the Sikyong, the president of the Tibetan parliament or Tibetan government in exile. So it equates them as good as Dalai Lama. This is something very significant. It is going to make a revolutionary change in the political scene of Tibet, because let us wish Dalai Lama a long life. But after his life, when they find a new baby as his reincarnation, China has its own games to install their own Dalai Lama. And at the same time, for having dialogue with the Dharamsala, China has been insisting that they don't recognize Central Tibetan administration or the government in exile or its elected leader, the Sikyong. But this time, with this law, it says that the Sikyong and CTA are also representatives of Tibet. So China, if ever wants to have a dialogue with Tibet, then the Central Tibetan administration in Dharamsala and the Sikyong, who is elected by the Tibetan people, they are the representatives of Tibet. This gives an infinite shelf life to the institution of Dalai Lama, to the government of Tibet in exile, and to the right of Tibetan people as a nation. This is, in my opinion, very interesting. This law has hit hard China at a point where it hurts China most, and which point is very, in my opinion, more than sinful, because this is a point which deals with the, I call it, demographic colonialism being practiced by China in Tibet, in East Turkestan, which is called Xinjiang, in South Mongolia, in Manchuria. This is how China has been doing for uh, decades. They have been bringing in Han Chinese from the mainland and installing them uh, in these occupied colonies. And unfortunately, whether it is Tibet or Xinjiang or South Mongolia, their populations are very, very small, very small. So bringing in many millions of Han Chinese and settling them in Tibet has changed the demography of Tibet in a very big way already. They are doing it same thing in Xinjiang. They are already have done it almost in South Mongolia. So what they are doing is, by planting millions of Han Chinese into these colonies, they are trying to change the demographic color of these colonies, which means in a few years what happened exactly to Manchuria. In Manchuria, slowly the Chinese pushed in millions and millions of Hans, and today the result is there are hardly any Manchurians left. If you go to the government figures, there are less than 1,000, I repeat, 1,000 people who speak Manchurian. You can imagine in a country of 1.4 or plus billion people, what happened to the Manchurians? They are lost already. This is the game they are playing now on Tibetans. They are playing the same game on Uyghurs, on the Mongols. So this law challenges China's right to bring in migrants and settle them in Tibet. And also, what China is doing is it's forcibly relocating the nomads of Tibet who have been living a free life, uh, hanging around in jungles and mountains according to the season. But now they are being forced to live in matchbox like houses with their animal husbandry and their culture. So this is being resisted, and this law puts its weight, America's weight, behind the Tibetan people. By addressing to the demographic colonialism, also this law addresses the Tibet, what is happening inside Tibet, the way Tibet's cultural identity, religious identity, lingual identity, and its historic identity is being destroyed for last 7 decades. This law challenges it and expects China to allow the Tibetan culture, Tibetan religion, Tibetan language to flourish once again. This law is, in another way, a bit unique. Although American governments have been supporting financially the Tibetan people in many ways. Rather, American governments have been even supporting projects inside occupied Tibet also to help the people, local Tibetans, to improve their financial situation. But they have been helping the exiled Tibetan community in quite a big way, in so many ways. But this law makes it very clear, and it for next 5 years, this law has approved money for various aspects for the promotion of Tibetan identity, its culture, and in the rehabilitation of Tibetan refugees and improving their financial situation, whether they are living in India or Nepal. And then at the same time, um, uh, American government has kept some money aside for the help of Tibetans living in occupied Tibet or Tibet Autonomous Region. That's also interesting. But I, as a journalist, find more interesting that American government has come out openly and very specifically about supporting the media on Tibet. For example, Voice of America and Radio Free Asia are among those very popular broadcasting agencies which are quite popular inside occupied Tibet. They are a good source of information, the true information, right information about Tibet, about China, about the world, for those people who are living under Chinese occupation. And in spite of all efforts of Chinese government of jamming these radio or banning online entry to these websites, still they remain popular. And American government has approved uh, very handsome money for Voice of America and Radio Free Asia, which gives a good assurance about information flow inside occupied Tibet. The law also has a special focus on the deteriorating situation of environment inside Chinese occupied Tibet and the way China is bungling with the natural resources of Tibet. Uh, it's also focused on the water security in Tibet because Chinese government has taken up a project going to billions of dollars about creating dams on Tibetan rivers, diverting waters of Tibetan rivers to China's own areas, and damage to the environment of Tibet, exploitation of minerals. So this law focuses on these acts of China and challenges it. The law has another important aspect, which is about China's assertion of reciprocity in diplomatic relations with China. Because China has been quite smartly expanding its diplomatic presence in all countries, even like India. They have so many consulate offices in addition to their embassy and which do their own function as you know a Chinese organization can do. So America has been asking China for many years to allow opening of a consulate of United States of America in Lhasa. And Chinese government has been resisting it. But this law legally puts a binding on government of America itself that the American government in future will not allow any new consulate of China to come up in America unless China allows American consulate in Lhasa and gives it as much freedom as a consulate is expected to get. There has been already the relations have been quite bad between the two countries, and as a result, in recent past, the consulates of China in Houston was closed, and in response, China closed American consulate in Chengdu, and the human rights uh, based. The law also puts the government agencies of America on alert uh, about dealing with China, especially the Chinese business. And in case any business, any company, any executives are engaged in denial of human rights to Tibetans inside occupied Tibet, uh, the the American government obliges its own agencies, its own officers, its own Secretary of State to take action on it and control those kind of business activities. One issue which has been always bothering not only America but the whole world is that China has been misusing its own media as an extended spying arm or an eavesdropping arm or even an agency of sabotage in many countries. If you see the list of the government accreditation list of journalists, you will find many Chinese news agencies, Chinese journalists who have been given permission to work from India. And same thing is happening in America. But Chinese government has made certain rules that if when you want to go to visit Tibet as a tourist, people are allowed. But the moment you say that you are a journalist or a diplomat, you are not allowed even to file your visa application. This is true. And the result is American journalists are not allowed to reporters or journalists working in Washington Post, or New York Times, or any other publication in America. Even those journalists, American journalists who are deputed in Beijing, are not allowed to enter Tibet until China takes care of their entire movement. And normally they allow foreign journalists only to go on conducted tours and are shown only those things which China want them to see. So America, this time, this TPSA 2020 puts its foot down and demands China that there must be reciprocity. Uh, and it obliges the Secretary of State to ensure that this reciprocity is there, that American journalists are also allowed, given the same freedom to travel and report from Tibet as US gives freedom to the Chinese journalists. So it also demands that US diplomats should be allowed to travel inside Tibet like Chinese diplomats are allowed to travel and enjoy impunity in within USA. This I find is very interesting. American assertion on Tibet has taken a very interesting shape this time in the form of this new law in which the Congress has demanded, has instructed the government, and the bill now makes it obligatory for the coming governments of America to form international diplomatic alliances and coalitions on issue of Tibet, to join hands with the governments and diplomats of various countries, like-minded countries, on issue of Tibet. So this is makes this opens new grounds for expansion of or popularity of the Tibetan issue in the on the international circuit, especially in the diplomatic and governments. So this is an issue which I'm sure in coming years, like Quad is becoming has become important, we will see a diplomatic alliance of democratic countries coming up in next very near future. So coming to the political significance of this law, so right now I spoke about various aspects. What does it say? But what is the political significance of this law? Let's come to those points. One thing unique about this law was that it was passed at a time when the world was watching Republicans and Democrats at worst of their relations. This is something very unique. This law was passed uh, at a time when the Democrats and Republicans were fighting inside and outside the Congress on so many issues. Even there was an issue of impeachment, and the relations were at their worst. But what we find that the Congress showed that maturity of coming out with a bipartisan act. So, can you imagine that in a country where the parliament, the House of Representatives and Senate, where the fight is going on between the two parties and taking really unfortunate and ugly shapes. But when it comes to voting on Tibet, we were surprised to see the kind of bonhomie, the kind of cooperation, and the spirit of working together between these two parties. If you see the example of House of Representatives, the total strength of the House is 435. And when there was voting, 392 representatives voted in favor of the Tibetan law, and only 22 opposed it. That's very unique. In a House of 435, Democrats were 232, Republicans were only 197, and they had the government. And the total number of the supporting votes were 392. That's very unique. And in the Senate, this is again very interesting. The Senate passed this bill twice, and both times with unanimity, 100%. There are 100 senators in the Senate, and Democrats were 46. The Republicans were having majority 52, but when it came to voting, everyone voted in favor of this. To me, it's a sign of maturity of a democracy, maturity of a nation, maturity of people's representatives. That, in spite of political differences between them and their parties, they could understand what are common national interests. I think that decides uh, the maturity, that reflects the maturity of a nation, of its democracy. And I'm sure the congressmen and congresswomen, they deserve salute for it. One thing interesting about the Senate's passing the bill was that it was introduced second time in very last days of Trump administration. And practically there was hardly any time to reintroduce the bill and go again through the whole process. So there was an agreement and a consensus that the bill was passed as a spending bill. And one thing very interesting about this bill becoming a law is, first we saw the unanimity, the consensus between two warring parties. And it was just before the Christmas last year when the bill was passed. And the day the White House opened after Christmas, on the very first day, President Trump signed it and the bill became a law. Here, I would look at it not only an initiative of one political party or one leader like Mr. Trump. To me, it appears that the maturity of American democracy reflects that here is a president who is going out and he is leaving behind a law and a legal environment and executive environment which will enable the rivals in future to take decisions on China. This is something unique. I'm sure democracies must learn this lesson from a mature democracy of America. That here is Trump administration, which don't see eye to eye with the coming new president, but uh, they are creating an environment which will help the coming government, the next coming governments, to take an action which looks after the national interest of America. This I find quite unique. And President Joe Biden, when he was not president, he was only nominated as candidate. At that time, he had made it clear that there is consensus as far as issue of Tibet, Xinjiang are concerned. And in September 2020, he made a public announcement which said that Biden-Harris administration will stand up for the people of Tibet. And this was a very clear indication to the whole world that if China is expecting that they will get better years in the White House after Trump is gone, then that was not the right expectation. So this shows that President Joe Biden, or I would say President Joe Biden as a candidate of Democrats, at that stage he had made it clear that they stand for Tibet. So that shows why what we are seeing today, the American government action on Tibet, has not disappointed those people who were worried that the new government of Joe Biden may not be as strong on China as Mr. Trump was. So, that's the indicator here. As I conclude this part of my talk, um, the Tibetan leadership deserves a special appreciation and a salute for their lobbying skills. It's really interesting that here is a community of refugees whose total number is 150,000 in the whole world. I repeat, in the whole world, the total number of Tibetan refugees today is 150,000. This number is far less than where I live in the community Shalimar Bagh in New Delhi. And this handful of people have created a government in exile and with all the functions. And they have reached a level where they could lobby with Capitol Hill and successfully lobby. So here, the credit goes to the Central Tibetan Administration and its leaders, and International Campaign for Tibet, the ICT, which functions from Washington D.C., which has been working endlessly and without tiring for last many decades to lobby for Tibet. And some of the most prominent leaders, I remember Lodi Gyari was one. Unfortunately, he died recently. And our Hollywood star, Richard Gere, he is the chairman of board of directors. Here is a man like Richard Gere who played his own role very actively. He made presentations before the committees in the Capitol Hill in favor of Tibet, and that's how we could see this bill coming up and becoming a law. So now we come to the concluding side that what happened in the Capitol Hill, what was said and decided on Tibet by America. What are the takeaways for countries like India? Yeah, we come to that. The very first takeaway for India is that India has to shed its indifference and the half-minded approach on Tibet. I'm sorry I'm using this term, but unfortunately, this is exactly the term one can use when it comes to Tibet and the Indian government's approach. Indian government has been living in a confused state for last 70 years. So seeing what is happening across the world, seeing what governments like America are deciding, and especially on issues which are directly related to India. For example, Dalai Lama's reincarnation is one of those issues which doesn't affect America, but it affects 100% India in so many ways, because India and Tibet have cultural ties of thousands of years. And in case that China is successful in installing a Dalai Lama of its own choice, the problem for countries like India, Nepal, Bhutan are going to be enormous, enormous, I would say. So the governments of India, Nepal, Bhutan have to somewhere stand for Dalai Lama. If we see our Indian Himalayan region, the 4,000 kilometer Himalayan region, which starts from Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh and going through Nepal and Bhutan, it's predominantly Buddhist. And in this area, Dalai Lama and various schools of Mahayana Buddhism have very deep influence. So one can imagine if China is able to install a Dalai Lama of its choice, he can play havoc with Ladakh, with Uttarakhand, with Himachal Pradesh, with Nepal, with Arunachal Pradesh, with all this region, and India can't afford it. So India will have to take a very clear stand on Dalai Lama's reincarnation, and Dalai Lama being one of the most respected personality of among the living beings. He is our guest. Indian government should wake up and understand the value of Dalai Lama. China is trying to use a puppet Panchen Lama and trying to dominate the whole world's Buddhist movement, trying to present China as the leader of it. Why India is lagging behind when we have Dalai Lama, when India is the origin of Buddhism? I think it is high time India should understand the value of Dalai Lama. And this is a takeaway from the American law that India should also stand for in favor of Dalai Lama on the issue of reincarnation, and India should challenge China's aggression on Buddhism, and India should occupy uh, again the place of leader of the Buddhist world with the help of Dalai Lama as our guest and the most supreme leader of Mahayana Buddhism. Tibet, although America has no physical contact with Tibet, and still America and many countries are worried, India is directly in physical proximity with Tibet, and even the changes in environment in Tibet, the flow of rivers affects India very much, enormously in so many ways. So India has to stand up for its interests. Uh, Insight about the environment in Tibet, especially the river waters. China's policy on river waters in Tibet is very damaging for India. It has created thousands of dams across rivers of Tibet, and on three occasions, twice in 2000 and once in 2005, China used Tibetan rivers to flood India in an enormous way. China is coming up with new dams in Yalung Tsampo river, which is called Brahmaputra. When it enters India, it becomes a Brahmaputra. So China is creating dams which of many times more capacity than the Three Gorges Dam. And China can use this water as a water bomb against India. So India has to wake up and stand for Tibet, and only a free Tibet will ensure that India's environment, India's safety is secured. And the type of mining and enormous mining is going on inside Tibet, which is affecting the flow of rivers, which is affecting the glaciers. The glaciers in Tibet are receding. Tibet is known as the third pole of the world, and the glaciers are receding. It is going to create, and it has already started creating, environmental havoc for the whole Asia and especially India. So India has to take a stand on Tibet, especially rivers of Tibet. Here, uh, when America talks of an international diplomatic alliance, India has to identify its own alliance. There are at least 10 countries which share which are fed by rivers of Tibet, and India is one of them and is being directly affected. So it will be a wise uh, position India takes to have an alliance with those riparian countries where Tibetan's rivers flow through: Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Vietnam, Pakistan. India should join hands with these countries because these countries are suffering because of the rogue behavior of China on Tibetan rivers. So that is another international diplomatic alliance which India can take initiative, whether with help of America or in its own. It will be in India's interest. And if America has been trying to have its consulate in Lhasa, India had the history of having a consulate in Lhasa. When China occupied Tibet, India had consulate in Lhasa. India had three trade posts in Tibet. India had a right to have a contingent of its soldiers inside Tibet. India was maintaining the telegraphic telephonic lines in Tibet. But unfortunately, our leaders like Pandit Nehru, uh, he gave up all these rights to China in the name of what he called Panchashil Agreement. If you read the text of so-called Panchashil Agreement of 1954, you will find there is no Panchashil. Actually, it is, if I can use the nasty term, Shil Bhang of India's interests, which was done by China and the Indian government allowed it 1954. India gave up all the rights of its consulate, of its trade rights, of its other rights, as I mentioned, to China without getting one thing in return. And India called it Panchashil. If you read the whole text, not at one point there is a mention of Panchashil. China tried to make happy Pandit Nehru. They put a reference in the intro part, which is non-operative. But India has been jumping throughout. We had a Panchashil agreement. Anyhow, so India has been trying for last many years to have a consulate in Lhasa, and Tibet has bluntly refused India's interest. But India is going on allowing China to open up consulates in India and those what I call Trojan horse of China, the Confucius Institutes, Confucius centers in India, in a very big way. India must wake up to this. So this is another point which is a takeaway for India. For India, the human rights situation in Tibet affects far more than it affects any other country. India has been fighting and shouting for the cause of the black people in South Africa, for Palestinians, and where not, all over the world. But it has been sleeping on its own neighborhood, where China has been not only occupying Tibet, but it has been denying human rights of the Tibetans. Today, if you go by count, 157 Tibetans have self-immolated in last few years. And imagine how much, whether it's not a shameful situation for all of us, not only me and others, but the whole human community, that one person committed self-immolation in Tunisia and there was uprising in a dozen countries. And here in Tibet, 157 have already done and nobody talks about it. I will not be surprised if this news comes as a surprise to many of my listeners right now. So, and then Nepal is playing a funny game when Nepal had an agreement for years and years with India and the United Nations Commission for Refugees, that refugees coming from Nepal, from Tibet, passing through Nepal, Nepal will allow them to be vetted by India and to be accepted by India as refugees. For last few years, Nepal is playing a satellite of China. Nepal has totally stopped the flow of Tibetans fleeing from Tibet to India. They catch them on the way and hand them over back to the Chinese. I have pictures when the Nepalese soldiers, after handing over the fleeing refugees to the Chinese army, they are coming back with boxes of beer as gift in return, which is really shameful for the Nepalese army, Nepalese government, and Nepalese people, that this is what they are doing to helpless refugees. India has to stand up for these refugees. World has to stand up. And we already know that China is using Occupy Tibet as a launchpad of separatism and terrorism against India. So India has every right to stand for Tibet and human rights of Tibetan people. India has been throughout knowing very well that the border between India, what they call India-China border today, actually it is India-Tibet border. For, I think, for more than 1,000 years, maybe 2,000 years, not along 1 inch of this 4,000 kilometer of border, not for one day there was Chinese army on other side. It was always Tibetan people on the other side. So why India uh, should brand it as India-China border? While dealing with China, India should say it is India-Tibet border, and it is India's right to tell the Chinese that you have no right to occupy Tibet and then use this illegal occupation to make claims on Indian land in Ladakh, in Himachal, in Uttarakhand, and in Arunachal Pradesh or in Sikkim, just because you are illegally occupying Tibet. I think this is where India has to take a stand and tell China that Tibet is an occupied country. Only then you can deal with a country like China. So this is how I look at this, the new US law on Tibet, which is called Tibet Policy and Support Act of 2020. This is my way of looking at this law, and I find it's a perfect example of how a democracy should function, how political parties with strong different opinion from each other, but how they should coordinate when it comes to national interests and national goals. So this, I think, is a very good example, and I hope the rest of world will take note of it. And there are so many takeaways for not only India, not only Nepal, for the whole world to take from this law. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
You've said that it shows the maturity of the US, of American democracy. That is true, but they are able to do it because they're a strong country. And they would be able to enact those kinds of laws, and they would be able to do something about Tibet, even if the Tibetan refugees were very small in number. It's because they're a strong country, and it's in their interest to do so. Our problem in India is that we are a very weak country, and though 70 years have passed since independence, we still remain a very weak country. During the early 60s or 50s, we were almost as strong as China. But today, China, because of very rapid development in the last 20 or 25 years, has a GDP that is 2.5 times India's. So, our problem is not the lack of democratic maturity within our country, but the inability to organize our resources in such a way that we become a stronger country than we are. That's our basic problem. And it's not so much the lack of democratic maturity that you have alluded to. I agree with all those problems that you have spoken of, the water problem, and how they can manipulate the rivers that flow into India. But the essential problem is our incapacity to organize our country in such a way that we can become a stronger nation. That's the fundamental problem. And so we will always have problems on how far we can go in supporting Tibet and Tibetan independence, if you like. So that is a fundamental problem for us. And I don't see any dramatic change in that regard, which would make India very much stronger. Of course, we are going to get far greater support from our Western friends, the United States and the emerging Quad. But then again, India is penetrated by communists who still think, that our friends are not Western powers. So there's still that degree of hesitation in that regard. So these are our fundamental problems in dealing with China and the Tibet question, rather than lack of democratic maturity. Thank
Right.
you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I agree with your comments. And on one point, you have already underlined that. I will only like to add one point that number one, China has progressed over last 30 years in such a big way that we used to be at par with each other and now we are far behind. Yes, I agree with you that nations have to decide, the leaders have to decide where they want to take the nation. And unfortunately, in India, uh, for a very, very long time, the national progress has been not the priority agenda of most of politicians. And because of that, we have suffered. There was no unanimity on national issues. There was no consensus about national goals. And that's why we'll find even today, in a situation like the Corona tragedy, we find that I have yet to see the first political leader who gives a sensible statement. Um, People are just trying to uh, they are thinking that this is time to win brownie points, and unfortunately we have done it throughout last 70 years. So if we as a nation have that attitude, we pay for it, and India is paying for it. Let us hope the wisdom will dawn on our leaders, on our people. More than leaders, I wish the wisdom dawns on our people, which we are lacking very badly. And as far as you said that India, how can India support Tibet? I would say India should first learn supporting itself. India should first learn, our leaders should stand, and our people have to learn stand up as a nation. Once we start respecting our freedom, once we start respecting our own national interest, only then we can think of someone else. Because supporting Tibetans, I would still, it's a very mean statement if I say that it is still it's a charity for most people. And charity is something you decide to do or not. So that is why the Tibetan issue has remained a charity for Indian people, Indian governments. The day we understand that Tibetan issue is actually our interest, it relates to our security, our national security, our environmental security, our economic security, our self-respect vis-a-vis China, only then we will stand up for ourselves. And once we stand up ourselves, you will find Tibet will automatically become our priority. So I think we have to start learning, respecting ourselves, and uh, understanding our own national aims and interests.
There has been a shift in Dalai Lama's stance on Tibet, absolute independence in last few years. So nowadays we see it looks like he has turned to a middle way, wherein instead of absolute independence, he thinks that we can go for a genuine autonomy of Tibet under the Chinese framework. So, does this stance of him or any such stance by him affect the effect of such laws by whether by US or any other country?
Yes, Rutuja, you have touched a very sensitive point. I have been dealing with my Tibetan friends at all levels, right from my very ordinary friends, Tibetans, to the level of His Holiness Dalai Lama himself and the senior leaders. On this point, I would say first that there is no doubt the Tibetans have to first understand and realize what are their national goals. Only then others can help them. As far as middle way is concerned, I would also make it clear that Dalai Lama had a reason to go for it, because Dalai Lama had realized in first 50 years that the whole world was only talking about Tibet. They were not doing anything. No country was doing anything. The result was China had a free hand and went on rampage in Tibet. They did everything, converted Tibet into a military cantonment, developed it as an army military base, and brought in millions and millions of Han Chinese, and the world was sleeping. So Dalai Lama at one stage realized that he has no friends. So finally, he had to deal with almost a very dirty example. When you have to deal with a very strong rapist, any person, or a very strong bully, if I am confronted by a big bully, I have only choice is either run away or if I'm not ready to surrender, at least find a compromise. So Dalai Lama was pushed to wall, with his back to wall, because of all his friends' countries. And moreover, when he made this, took this stand, at that time the Western countries were falling over each other to have business relations with China, to be in good books of China, and none of them had the courage to stand up for a Dalai Lama who says, I want freedom. Because China would say, you are interfering in my country and integrity of my country, internal matters. So there were suggestions to him from these governments, these friends, the same America, same Europe, to please tone down your demands so that we can deal with China. So one reason for him was that he came down on middle way or genuine autonomy because of these friends' suggestions. And secondly, he himself found that he was no match to such a huge Goliath. So, and he was worried about what destruction China was doing on Tibetan identity, on Tibetan population. So at that time, he had the only hope was that let us try to plead with China so that China can slow down on destroying Tibetan identity, Tibetan people. So the poor man, I say Dalai Lama, poor man, that was his only hope. So this decision was taken under duress also. Dalai Lama has always made it clear when China says that Tibet is part of China, Dalai Lama always says that I am ready to accept Tibet as part of China within Chinese constitution, but I cannot say that the Tibet was always a part of China because in history Tibet was an independent country. And that is the point where China refuses to accept this middle way of Dalai Lama. But now I think this is time for Dalai Lama because of his age also and because of the changing environment. This is for the Tibetan leadership to revisit their middle way approach and stand up more strongly, because if they have seen already in last 30 years, China has, number one, not stopped destroying the Tibetan identity. They have not stopped overwhelming Tibet with the Han citizens. They have not stopped denying human rights of Tibetans. They have not stopped denying the basic, even developmental facilities to Tibetans. And when he has not achieved that goal, so expecting China to cool down by giving concessions, I think this is time Tibetans have to understand that you can't deal with a bully like China by giving concessions. You have to stand up strongly. And now this law, which I say Tibet Policy and Support Act has come, which says so many things in very strong words. I think for Dharamshala, for Tibetan leaders, for Dalai Lama himself, this is time to revisit the middle way policy, and let us hope they will see wisdom into it. Yeah.
After 70 years, where you have, as you have pointed out rightly, that lot of demographic change has been artificially introduced in Tibet. What change one can expect, and why would Tibetans now would try to what do you call increase the intensity of their protest when they have for last 70 years have seen that they have no friends actually? Everybody just talks but does nothing. And US also did this law only because they finally realized that China is becoming really a superpower and they're going to challenge them, and that's why they wanted to do something to curb their wings a little bit. If it was Iraq, they would have gone and bombarded them. If it was some other South American nation, they would have gone and created chaos over there. But they could not do that with China, so that's why they said, okay, I'll at least make a law. So why would Tibetans now risk another series of immolations? Because they still don't know if US really mean, or they would really have the willpower, the energy to upset the emerging superpower, which is China.
Yeah, it's a very challenging question. Thank you very much for challenging me to come out with something sensible. Your main question is what more Tibetans can do than what they have done, and how much sacrifice they can do. And countries have not been alert earlier or friendly earlier. Now there are countries who are coming up only because of their own interests. I agree with you. See, one thing, let us not forget. मैं हिंदी में बोलूंगा, अगर हमको स्वर्ग देखना है ना तो मरना तो हमें खुद पड़ेगा. Nobody can see or visit the heavens on your behalf, because Tibetans have to regain their independence, so it is their fight. They have to be smart enough to see the right opportunity and right place and right people where from they can get support. For last 60, 70 years, the things were unfortunately very much against Tibetans. I see that this kind of, let it be purely because of Americans' compulsions. So what? If it is a compulsion of Americans to go anti-China, it is an opportunity for Tibetans to join hands. This is how you can fight. You can join hands, and it's only finding common interest that we can find a common enemy. So right now the atmosphere is changing, and this TPSA Act 2020, in my opinion, is a tip of the iceberg. It is an indication of the changing times in favor of Tibet. I think this is the first volley fired in favor of Tibet. And you will see many things coming up. European Union is also waking up once again. So these alliances like Quad are suddenly coming up against China, which we could never imagine 10 years before. So the world is changing. Only thing is what Tibetans should do, and I would appreciate Tibetans, that 150,000 refugees, they have not given up. In last 60 years, they have organized themselves. They have survived their identity. They have multiplied their friends. They have organized themselves into a really an impressive group. So they have all those elements where they can win. Now they have to find the right friends. Let us not forget, when India was fighting for freedom from the British, we had there were so many individuals and organizations within Britain, in France, or so many places who were friendly to India, and our leaders made best use of them. And that made a difference. It's not that it was because of that India won, but it's, the momentum was built up because of Indian leaders were able to exploit that friendship or make best use of that friendship. So Tibetans today also have that situation. And luckily for them, things are changing. And you said that how many more Tibetans will have to self-immolate. It's very unfortunate. I think this challenge is not, this your question is not a challenge for Tibetans. Maybe they can, maybe another 200 can immolate. You see their spirit. But I think it's a shame on people like me and the rest of world that we are so shamelessly watching it without raising a finger. I don't know why New Delhi makes noise on everything when something happens in Palestine or had been happening in South Africa or at so many places. But it never had the courage to stand up and tell China what the hell you are doing in Tibet or what the hell you are doing in Xinjiang. Xinjiang was India's neighbor, first neighbor of India. When Xinjiang was occupied, our link with the Central Asia was broken. And our government did not know that it has been occupied. So isn't it shameful? It's all these things are a question to our conscience, our wisdom, our honesty, our commitment to democratic values, human rights values. So the challenge is before us, before the whole world. And let us hope their conscience is being pricked. Maybe it is because of COVID, maybe because of arrogance, belligerence of China, but it is being pricked and people are coming up.
I just
Yeah.
wanted to get your opinion on that, all the demographic changes which China has brought into the Tibet region, how that is going to impact anything moving forward.
Yes, this is very unfortunate situation. What China is doing is they try to make permanent changes. Once they occupy or enter an area, what they are doing with Japanese islands or Philippines, they first go there only for a survey, then they go only for maybe doing something, a visit, and suddenly you discover that there are people are living there. They have expanded a dune of sand as a island into an airstrip or a base for navy. It only happens because the others are sleeping, and China has been bringing in Han Chinese into Tibet since the days of Mao. I remember as a young man listening to Radio Beijing, that was called Radio Peking at that time. In their Hindi news, they would say that the pioneers, the Red Guards are, 100, 200, 5,000 have gone to Tibet to help the people there. Actually, they were occupying there. They were, so this process has continued till today and we have been sleeping over it. So China has changed the demographic. I have been a few times inside Chinese occupied Tibet, quietly as a visitor, but as a journalist and as a photographer. And I've seen those demographic changes happening. I have seen cities like Lithang, Shigatse, Lhasa, Kadze, where parallel Chinese cities have come up, where more population of Chinese is living today than the original Tibetans. So this is their style of doing it. They did it with Manchuria. They went there to construct a railway line, and then they produced children and brought in more brothers and sisters, and finally they outnumbered the Manchurians, and now today Manchuria is gone. They are doing the same thing with Xinjiang Uyghur people. They are doing it with Tibetans. They are doing it with South Mongolia. Now, it is not only the fight of Tibetans, because Tibetans have unfortunately been occupied, and it is their fate. To some people living in exile, other people living and suffering inside Tibet. So they are used to it. We are not used to it. We can't afford it. So I think all countries who have common interest vis-a-vis China should join hands and to fight back. And let us see how much we can undo the damage China has done to Tibet and such countries.
Does MEA have any 5 years plan, Panchvasi Yojana related to neighboring countries? Like for Tibet, it has any plan? Like so every 5 years, there should be evaluation of MEA. What is happening in Tibet and what has MEA has done related to Tibet, or for Bangladesh, for Nepal. So what is MEA exactly doing for the questions like Tibet? It should be really reevaluate every year. So it has become more problem. It is like it is the issue of national security now. So, what? How can I reevaluate this MEA and its working? So what are what are the things they there to I should know what has MEA has done for these 70 years.
Vinayji, I also keep asking the same question to myself. About MEA, unfortunately, less said the better. After so many decades, I must say that now the character of MEA appears to be changing. They are now on the offensive. First time I am seeing them. Otherwise, unfortunately, it was, if you see the functioning of governments, when there is a minister of health, then it is the health minister who takes a decision and the bureaucracy implements it. When there is a minister of education, uh, he or she studies the issues and take decisions, and the bureaucracy implements it. In MEA is the only ministry I find that we had such worthy ministers who behave like, if I say, in other ministries, it is the dog who wags the tail. In MEA, for last more than 60 years, the tail has been wagging the dog. Most of the ministers have been at the mercy of those brilliant MEA officers, and they were guided by and taking decisions because of what officers feel. So that bureaucracy has been dominating, and I don't want to go in details of the level of commitment at bureaucracy. This is not the right forum for it. But unfortunately, because of that, there was lack of wisdom at the part of leaders. That is why they allowed the bureaucrats to hold their nose and make them run around. I think in last couple of 3-4 years, the way Indian foreign policy has started moving, I think there is some change. And let us hope that this change continues, and my hopes about them are real. I also wish that. So maybe our bureaucracy has been behaving there, but I find there is if you see similarity, we have been living in Ram Yug, where everything was, based on Adarshvad and idealism. India will sacrifice its interests and, beat its chest for the Palestinians. And in return, every time we'll get abuses in every Muslim Islamic forum. We were criticized and no one would even stand for us on Kashmir. But we will be happy every time, whether they ask for it or not, but we'll beat our chest in favor of Palestinians. We will not get anything in return. But now there is some kind of reciprocity we see in our conduct, the way our government is dealing with Taiwan, with Israel, with so many countries, with Central Asian countries. I find these are positive signs. So, dealing with China, I still find we need to understand our, powers as Hanumanji. We don't realize that. As I said, we were behaving in the Ramji's way, no, an idealist way. I think this is time to behave like Krishna. And let us hope our government, our leaders, our bureaucracy, our MEA, our defense ministry, they should now start taking cue from Lord Krishna rather than Ramji, and fight the whole fight like Mahabharata, because there is no on the other side you don't have good people. You have only Duryodhans on the other side, only Kauravas on the other side. So if you have to fight, then you have to fight like Krishna. So I see some signs in the MEA or those traits of Krishna coming. Maybe that is because of the changed leadership. So let us hope it will continue. But I don't see there are any long plans on Tibet or these issues. There are no signs, at least. Let us hope there will be.
Okay, sir. What I'm saying that is, well, whatever you say about the Krishna, we have to be statistically like Krishna, not more any like Ram. I mean, we like Krishna. Do you see any hope like Mr. Modi? Do you see he has some kind of this kind of statistics like that on his external affairs and defense area? He's taking this kind of steps, any kind of steps like this.
You know, right now I don't want to be in a debate of pro Modi or anti Modi, because in India it's a fashion these days to be anti Modi. Because if the moment you are pro Modi, you are a Godi media and you are a Bhakt. This is a very common argument, which even those people who have no answers to any question, even they are very aggressive on this. But one thing, as a journalist, as an observer, I have seen in last few years a few things which to me appear to be the right signs of coming days. I'll give you one example. As a journalist in 1992, I was working with India Today. 30 years after India-Tibet border trade was stopped because of 1962 war, India and China agreed to start border trade at just near Gunji in Taklakot. And India Today assigned me to go there and report it. So when I arrived in Delhi, my colleagues had told me, Vijay, you are taking a wrong decision. Mar jaoge. You will have to walk one full day in the mountains to reach that point. No fun in doing that. Just pick up some news agency report and file your report. But because it was Tibet, so I said, no, I will. I took the tab. I reached Pithoragarh, and there I was told that it was not one day, it could be many days. And I discovered I had to walk 8 days in one direction. 8 days means in the morning, wherever night I had spent in those dead villages where there were no people living, because people had run away from there over 30 years because of no business, no job, no development. So from early morning to night till I will find a place, I would walk, and I walked 8 days to reach the border because there was no road. When I was walking, I had many army people walking along me and their mules carrying luggage. So I asked them, "Okay, bhai, why don't you have a road to the border?" So they said, "Sir, officer logo se pucho, ask your leaders, ask our officers." So on way back in the cantonment or that establishment, military establishment, I visited in Pithoragarh and met some officers, and I asked them why we don't have a road. They told me, "Sir, the government has a clear policy. We will not construct any road to connect our borders. If we do it, Chinese army will walk into India using those roads. So we will not have a road." Just imagine 92, which means 43 years after 45 years after independence, we had only one road on 4,000 kilometer border in Nathula, which was not created by India. It was made by the king, the Chogyal of Sikkim. In 4,000 kilometers, we not had one army post which was connected to by road. Now, Modi ji has created 72 or 76 such roads in last 5-6 years. And almost every Indian army post has been connected with a good road right up to the last point. And in this area where we had a recent fight with China, where 20 Indian soldiers lost their lives. The fight was only because China was so desperate, because Indian army had already created a road from Leh right up to the Daulat Beg Oldie point. And Indian position was becoming so strong that the China challenge to China on in that area near Aksai Chin and this Daulat Beg Oldie, India's danger was going to become permanent. That is why China attacked, only because of the road. And Indian army could resist it because they had the backup force from because of those roads. So one change is the development is not happening only in India, on borders also. The kind of other decisions this Modi government is taking on solving the basic issues which were roadblocks, whether it is in the economic field, in the finances, or industrial policy, or old laws which were stopping your progress for no reason. So many areas, the decisions he has taken, he has brought in millions and millions of Indians into the financial system by giving them bank accounts. So I see that the direction of the change happening is a very positive one. So I find that these steps, if they are indicator, then India is going in the right direction, and surely the credit goes to Narendra Modi. Whether somebody brands me as a Modi Bhakt, welcome. If telling truth is a crime, I am a criminal man. Because these are the changes we had never seen in my lifetime. We had never seen these things happening. So if things are changing, if the policies are changing, development is changing, your foreign policy is changing, defense policy is changing, that means something is happening. So that's how I look at it.
Sir, I have a very simple question. Somehow I feel that when it comes to India's stance on Tibet, then maybe India is having a few apprehensions concerning maybe the fact that if India will speak on it, then China might end up maliciously connecting it with Jammu and Kashmir and the role India plays there. Even though I'm just saying it from the China's perspective, even though both of the cases are completely different. So I just wanted to seek your opinion on the same. Could it be one of the reasons why India is pretty apprehensive to talk anything on Tibet?
Oh, on Jammu and Kashmir. See, it's only a kind of bogey created by pro-China people and the Chinese themselves, that if you raise issue of Tibet, we'll raise the issue of Kashmir. Now where is the issue of Kashmir? And you are talking to this person called Vijay Kranti. I am a Kashmiri. I belong to a family. My father and my grandfather became refugees 3 times in their life because they were Kashmiris and because they did not have that religion which was preferred by the rulers there and politicians. I'm not exaggerating it. So I belong to that class. In one of the parties where diplomats meet, I was talking about Kashmir, Tibet, and the Chinese diplomat who was there, he said, "Gentlemen, don't worry. If you raise the issue of Tibet, we will raise Kashmir." So then I told him very politely, "Sir, you have already done it. Whatever was within your reach, you have already done it, and you have failed on Kashmir. If there is anything left, please go and do." I told him in these words. So if there is any fear about Jammu Kashmir, it's only those people would be afraid of it who don't understand the situation. Kashmir situation is very, very different. Kashmir is not an occupied land. Kashmir's part has been actually occupied. I come from there. From my family comes from Mirpur. Pakistan occupied Jammu Kashmir. I have that identity. But unfortunately, in a country like India, even my father was not given identity as a Jammu Kashmir wala, because the government in central government, anyhow, it's a different issue. We'll not go into that. Maybe sometimes we can talk about Jammu and Kashmir. There are many issues which we can discuss about. But Indian government's stand on Tibet has been weak, not because of Jammu and Kashmir, because it has been always weak itself. Indian government could not look after its own interest in so many fields. So there was no surprise it failed the Tibetan people, or it failed on the Tibetan front. It failed there because it failed on its own fronts. So I believe no country can fight for others unless it is strong on its own ground. So now things are changing, and I hope things should be somewhere different. The world is changing, and seeing the atmosphere and the pressure from China, Indian government is realizing that China, you cannot make friend with China through giving concessions. China will listen to you only when you speak in their language and hit them back more strongly than they do it to you. Only then they listen to you, they respect you. And that process has started. So I hope it percolates very soon to Tibet also.
Yes, sir. I just want to add to what you said on and what some of the participants asked on the stability, the certainty of Western support. Because there was a reluctance. They spoke of reluctance to promote the Tibetan question. That occurred when China was seen as a counterweight to the Soviet Union. But I think those days are now gone, and China is seen as the main rival of the United States and Western world. So there is, I think, going to be a greater stability and certainty in Western opposition to China's aggressions and hostile behavior, because Tibet, together with Xinjiang and Hong Kong and Taiwan, are seen as the main Achilles heel of China. So the question is more from our side, whether we have the commitment and the resolution and the determination to endorse Western positions on China. But I think that is more uncertain. But there's no, and one has to, of course, applaud the Modi government's resolution and determination in this regard. But I hope that stays in the future also. There's no uncertainty in as far as the West goes. To me, it seems the uncertainty is on the Indian side, because we still have lots of communists in our country who, want to patch up with China.
Oh, Sanjay Yadav ji, I agree with you on the comments you have made, and especially about the changing attitude and opinion of Western countries about China. The reason is that these almost all Western countries have never been guided by democracy or idealism, which they always claim. They have been always guided by their self-interest, financial interests, and financial interests of their corporates. So that is how their policies on USSR, on China were defined. So unfortunately, as you said very rightly, because of fear of USSR, they encourage China. I look at it that in American history, whenever they write honest history of America, they will find the worst two enemies of America were Henry Kissinger and Nixon, who did not understand America, who did not understand USSR, who did not understand China. So they created a hawa of fear of USSR and ran into the lap of China. If you read the first meeting of these two great leaders, American leaders, the way the contempt with which Mao dealt with them, you will be surprised. But still, these were the two people who, out of fear of USSR, they created a Frankenstein of China. They gave, number one, the moral respect, political respect to China, which it did not deserve. They gave it position in the world community, which it did not deserve. They gave it business support, gave it finances, gave it technology, and finally handed over their own manufacturing facilities and even their market to China out of fear of Soviet Union, without understanding that within 20 years after, or less than 15 years after they did it, the Soviet Union collapsed on its own weight because there was nothing inside Soviet Union. And these two American leaders could never realize. They were so afraid of Soviet Union. In the process, they created a Frankenstein called China. They had big hopes they will make big money. Their corporates made money. But slowly now they are realizing that all their assessment about China was wrong. Now their eyes are opening. For most of them, it's already too late. But still, they are countries who know how to stand up again on their feet. They have gone through 2 world wars. So now they are standing up and realizing the reality of China. And all these signs which you are seeing in European Union or in America, these are signs of that realization. Now it is for countries like India and others who have to see it as an opportunity, see it as a common interest with these countries to handle China. And that is how we can handle China. And now this, I think, push is coming to a show slowly. And China has started realizing that the world is standing against China. And we don't have to be shy about it. Now, give it a big blow. Join hands with all those who are with you or who are thinking like you on China. And then that is how you can kill that Frankenstein.